Friends, what is the most important thing that you have been given to do today? The Bible says it's raising your children. And the most important thing we can do for our children is to hand on to them the one holy Christian and apostolic faith. Last week, I shared 4 things that research seems to indicate has the most impact in handing on the faith to our children. And this is, I think, experience-based as well. And those 4 things are that we would have regular, honest, caring conversations with our children. Secondly, that we would have regular devotions with our children. Thirdly, that we would make use of opportunities to serve our community with our children. And then lastly, that we pay attention to the rituals and the traditions in our household. So the idea last week was think about that and be reflective on how those things are taking place in your home right now. This week is more reflection. Got a few more things I want to share with you. And we'll talk next week about more, for want of a better term, practical things that we can do. But today, what I'd like to talk to you about is liturgies. A liturgy is not simply a church thing, it is a human thing. Your life is filled with liturgies every day. When you go to the store, by the time you leave your car, enter the building, get your cart, interact with certain people, follow a certain path, grab certain objects, have certain kind of communications with certain people, it's all a liturgy. The author James K.A. Smith wrote a book about the liturgies of life and the impact that these things have. And so he comes up with a definition that I think is helpful for us. He says that a liturgy is an embodied practice that orients a person toward a particular vision of human flourishing. So it's a practice that's embodied. You do it, and it orients your thinking on what does it mean to have a good life. And going to the grocery store clearly matters because you got to eat, right? But the thing that I want you to notice about these liturgies is what Smith calls either thick practices or thin practices. So if our whole life is filled with these liturgies, obviously not all are created equal. And a thick liturgy or a thick practice would be something that is identity forming. A thin practice would be something that it's a habit, you do it, but it doesn't necessarily define who you are. So going to the dentist, it's a practice, there's a liturgy, but it doesn't really define your identity. Because watch how this works. We can pick certain liturgies that we know are thin, but notice how sometimes what should be thin becomes thick. So here's what I mean. We're coming up on football season. We have a lot of opportunities to watch football. And notice that there's definitely a liturgy to it. From the time you sit down, the people you have around you, right? It's just a shared experience. And I think we could all agree, at least theoretically, it's thin. That is, this is entertainment. My identity is not formed by these football teams. And yet, just by way of illustration, notice that it's possible that when the Huskers lose on Saturday, it can affect us all week long. So if they lose, we're just sad. We talk, just the conversations we have with people. It reflects the idea that maybe my identity is a little too bound up in how this football game goes. You could say the same thing about shopping. We'll say online shopping. There's a liturgy to it. From the time you click on or, open up your computer, log on, you start shopping, you're just looking for needs, or even just wants, but it's not necessarily identity forming. And yet it can be. We start to think about who we are in terms of the things that we buy. For sure, advertisers are playing on this. They get you to buy their stuff because they make a direct correlation or connection to who you are. Get this thing, and your life will be better. There will be human flourishing as a result. So let's be aware of those liturgies in our life. And I guess this would be a good opportunity to bring one other thing to mind that I've talked about in the past. Educator named Charlotte Mason says something that I found really, really helpful. And she says that you have, as a teacher, you have control over three things. And I think this also communicates to us parents. She says explicitly you have control and certainly influence on living ideas, habits, and environment. You get to decide what ideas go into the minds and hearts of your children, and those ideas inform the way your children think and how they see things. You get to decide what habits are going to take place in your home and which ones you're going to reinforce. You get to decide what the environment in your home is. And we're not talking about decoration. We're talking about the emotional space, or to use the modern parlance, the vibe, right? If I'm present as a father, that creates a certain environment. If I'm not present, or if I'm in a bad mood, that creates a certain environment. Well, what's interesting is that these liturgies that we're talking about, they all convey some sort of idea of what matters or what's the good life. They're all reinforced by habits, and they are done in an environment. And we should pay attention especially to that environment. I'll give you an example. So for me, I love music. And that is something I've fostered in my children. For example, I have given some thought to what is the music from the 50s to today that they should be aware of, like a history of rock kind of thing. When we're doing dishes, we're often listening to music, and we're sharing music and talking about it, and I'm present, I'm excited about it. It's rubbed off on my kids, I would say. There's an environment there, and there's definitely a liturgy. Well, at prayer time, I can and should be aware of the environment. I know that this matters. It matters most. There are times, however, where it's late, I'm tired, I'm ready for the kids to go to bed, I got other things I need to do, and I've set a certain kind of environment. But then there's other times where we're connected, I'm present, because this really does matter. So that's something for me to be aware of, to be reflective of. And so I'm inviting you to do the same thing this week. So I got 3 questions for you. The first question is, what are the predominant liturgies in your home? Second, what ideas are being reinforced by the habits of these liturgies? And then third, What's the environment like for the different liturgies that are in your home? What is it right now, and what would you like to see? Like we all need to grow. So, what direction do you want to grow? What would you like to see? So that's the thought for today. Think about it. Shoot me an email if you'd like to pursue it any further. For sure, like I said, I'd like to meet soon via Zoom with all the parents that are able to join us, and let's talk about these things in more detail. And we'll continue to grow together in this wonderful work of raising our children. God bless.